Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Librarians Toolkit 2021 with the theme of books and reading supporting mental health. My name is Jonathan Davidson. I'm Project Director of the West Midlands Readers Network, and I'm your co-host for this afternoon's event. And I'm delighted to introduce our co-host working with me, Angela Hickin. Angela is Project Manager for the West Midlands Readers Network, and she's going to tell us a little bit about how this afternoon will run. Welcome, Angela.
Hello, and a warm welcome to those watching. It's wonderful to return with another Librarians Virtual Toolkit after our first foray into an online version of our annual conference back in November 2020. And in returning, we wanted to discuss a topic that's central to the way that we as library staff and literature professionals connect with our readership. And that's a focus on books and reading supporting mental health. We'll be bringing you a range of speakers in presentations and panel discussions, looking at the benefits of books, of shared reading, connecting people through reading, bringing people together socially to feel a sense of belonging and of community, remembering we read to know we are not alone. We'll be looking at reader development initiatives, projects and partnerships with examples from here in the West Midlands as part of the Readers Network catchment, but also nationally. If you want to know more about the West Midlands Readers Network, please head to our website where you can read all about our different work strands. We're Arts Council England funded, coupled with annual subscriptions from library authorities across our region. You'll have received a link in your email event reminder, but also to say in our latest news section of the website, you'll find today's full programme, the running order and the speaker details. And if you missed our digital conference in November, where we explored support for readers during interesting times, you can watch it at leisure at the West Midlands Readers Network YouTube channel, where this film will also be archived after today's broadcast. For the panel discussions, we do invite you to type a question into the YouTube live chat, and we'll select as many as we can in the time allowing to put to our guests. It would be really great as well if you started by typing in where you're tuning in from today. It's lovely. We're welcoming people from right across the country. I've seen in chat, we've got Bristol to Blackpool, London boroughs to Leeds. It's really lovely to have you all along today. But for now, I'm going to hand back to Jonathan, who's going to introduce the first of our guest speakers.
Thank you very much, Angela. And yes, I echo that welcome to all of you who are tuning in from across the UK and potentially beyond. Our first speaker is Stewart Hamilton. Stewart is Head of Libraries Development for the Local Government Management Agency in Ireland. And to open the afternoon, we've asked Stewart to speak a bit about the Ireland Reads project and how, as a reader development initiative, it focused on the value of books and reading and how it therefore also promoted well-being. Stewart, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, guys, for having me. I'm really happy to be here. I think we're going to start with a very short video to relax your mind and senses. So, Hedwin, if you can run VT.
Squeeze in a read for Ireland Reads on Thursday, 25th of February.
So that video was produced for our Ireland Reads National Reading Campaign, which ran in February this year. And the campaign was designed to get people to set aside time to squeeze in a read and take time for themselves and escape in a good book during their busy lives, and particularly during the pandemic. The video complemented a lot of other pieces on radio, social media, and in print, and it drove everyone towards a National Reading Day on the 25th of February. So in this short presentation, I'm just going to try to give you a bit of an idea of what we were aiming to achieve, what we did, and what the results were. So next slide, please. Now, the background to all of this was that the government in Ireland was rolling out a national health and wellbeing campaign from October 2020 onwards. With the winter approaching, with COVID stress being what it was, There was a national campaign really focused on getting people to, I guess, centre themselves and look after themselves. So a number of different strands. And we were asked in Libraries Ireland, which deals with the public libraries, what we had in our back pocket, what we could do. And we did have a bit of inspiration from Australia, a program called Australia Reads, which was about people dropping everything and reading. And we very quickly built a sort of reading for pleasure campaign to support mental health, as I said, focused on the 25th of February. The objectives really were to encourage reading as a positive activity during those dark months, drive people to the website where they could take a pledge. They could pledge to spend minutes reading on that National Reading Day, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Drive people to online resources. The libraries during this time were closed to libraries, but also to bookshops, so very, very reading focused, and get people to talk about what they were reading and encourage people to share their reading experiences. And we were looking at everybody, but we were particularly interested in people who may have fallen out of the habit of reading. So lapsed readers that we wanted to get back on board. Next slide, please. Now, we were quite lucky here. We had generous funding from the Department of Health in Ireland, and that €350,000 was split between creative, marketing, and we did have a good allocation for bookstock, which ended up being digital bookstock. Our approach was to build a coalition that went well beyond libraries, to have partners and ambassadors from all sorts of different sectors. We wanted a bilingual website in English and in Irish with very distinct branding. And hopefully from the video already, you can see that we achieved that. And our big thing was to make sure that everything we developed would be available for all of our partners to use. So we open sourced our collaterals. You could use them, you could adapt them, put your organization's logo on them, kind of supporting messaging. And by doing that, we could leverage all of our supporters in their own way to do their own thing in support of the campaign. And as I said, we were going to go hard in on the benefits of reading for health and well-being. We were going to organise some national online events, 3 of them in the week of the National Reading Day, but actually we wanted all of our supporters to do their own events as well. Next slide, please. Now, as I said, we wanted distinctive branding. We worked with an artist called Tara O'Brien, who worked also with our creative partners Ogilvy, and we came up with this concept of squeezing in a read. You're very busy. Have you got time? Just squeeze in 5 minutes to sit down and find yourself in a book. So we were able to use people in slightly contorted positions, squeezing in a read, as you saw in the video, in sort of bookshelves and various different places. And this concept also lent itself quite well, as you can see there on the left, to sort of squeezing in banner ads on websites and also in print media. And again, these sorts of pieces, as I said, all open source with the main branding down the bottom you can see there with the Keep Well campaign, Libraries Ireland and the Government of Ireland. Next slide, please. And then, you know, the visuals needed to contribute to that overall sense of well-being. We loved the music that came to us for the advert. It was by a guy called Dennis. He's only got one name. He's like the Irish Prince. And, you know, that kind of feeling of relaxation, taking the stress levels down. And that was really what we were aiming for, because it was a really good fit for that overall national Keep Well campaign, which wanted people to kind of get active, whether it was through sort of reading or even through exercise, to support themselves, their health and well-being through the dark winter months. So a lot of our talking points for the campaign circulated to the media and to the supporters focused on the benefits of reading, reducing stress, living longer, increasing your vocabulary. And we actually found this to be very fertile ground for libraries, and something I feel that the sector, the community as a whole, should pick up on because of that connection between reading and your health and well-being. Next slide, please. I mentioned we built a kind of super coalition in order to deliver this. And we started really with the reading ecosystem, the things that we knew well, the libraries, the writers, the publishers, the booksellers. We pulled all those guys together, but we were also able to draw on government departments, our health education departments. The public libraries here live in the Rural and Community Development Department. We also brought the Children's Department on board. We had agencies and charities on board. We were lucky to get media partners. RTE is the national broadcaster. Facebook supplied advertising credits. And we recruited a number of high-profile ambassadors from all different walks of life in Ireland. to basically pick the campaign up and spread it throughout their own networks. As you're all aware, obviously, social media amplification is such an important thing for any campaign these days. So we were very careful to assemble a kind of superstar cast for that. And we brought everyone together into one steering group, so sort of representative from each sector, so that we could sort of, get people to coordinate all of the activities that they were doing. And again, with everything being open sourced, it really gave people the flexibility to promote the campaign in the way that they wanted. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned we were driving everybody towards one website, islandreads.ie, and there you could take a pledge, and this is the pledge page. You could say how many minutes you were going to sit down for, or even hours you were going to sit down for on the National Reading Day itself on 25th of February, and we could connect with you. We get your name and email address, and we can remind you ahead of the event. Now, the other main feature on the book, on the website, if we go to the next slide, please, was our book recommendation engine. And I mentioned that we wanted to get people back into the habit of reading. So we designed this almost like a Couch to 5K app for reading. So you could put in the type of book that you wanted, the sort of level of reader that you felt you self-identified as, and the number of minutes that you had available to read every day. And if you go to the next slide, we would generate for you a recommendation that you could then click through to the library website to borrow through BorrowBox, who were a partner in this, or at your local bookshop. And we actually very quickly developed a database of about 1,000 titles selected by Ireland's librarians. So not Amazon's algorithm, but the library staff themselves generated this database. And the book recommendation tool was a huge hit. So if we go to the next slide, on the day itself, the 25th of February, we had everything lined up. We'd done all of our background. We were on all of the major radio shows. We were on the National Broadcast News. We were in the big broadsheet and tabloid newspapers. Social media went really big. We encouraged people to share pictures of themselves reading, possibly in a contorted squeeze in a read position. And we were able to kick off the whole thing with a video message from Michael D. Higgins, who's the president of Ireland and an absolute lover of libraries and reading and culture. So everything really did come together on the day. And people loved sharing what they were reading, using the Squeeze in a Read and Ireland Reads hashtag. And if you go to the next slide, we had the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin. He was also there, the very high profile politicians, big organizations and associations. Everyone went mad, and we were trending by far on the day as an extremely important activity. And we held our 3 national events during that week. We had about 1,200 people turn up to those during the week, and thousands more watched them afterwards. So a fantastic success really on the day. If you go to the next slide, please. At the end of the campaign, basically, this was a huge hit for libraries. We'd already had a pretty good pandemic. We had a good public profile, which is why we got the opportunity to do this. But we'd engaged even more people. And even though we see those engagement figures a lot on social media, we're very proud of what we achieved in terms of the reach of the campaign. With 50,000 people using the book recommendation engine, over 10,000 pledges, and nearly 1 million minutes pledged, this was a real successful campaign. And we saw that in the increase in lending and new users on BorrowBox. So the final slide, basically, we're going to do it again. Ireland Reads 2 will take place next year in February. The National Reading Day will come into its second iteration. We're going to try and learn from everything that we did this year. And we also hope that the buildings will be open. So look, that was Ireland Reads, a very quick overview. I hope the rest of the presentations are super interesting, and thanks for having me along.
Thank you so much to Stewart Hamilton for sharing the wonderful and inclusive Ireland Reads campaign, all centred around reading for well-being and around that wonderful slogan, Squeeze in a Read. Brilliant. And as Stewart said, a huge hit for libraries. So congratulations to all involved. And now in our first panel discussion, I'm delighted that we're focusing on the Reading Friends scheme. I'm joined by its programme manager at the Reading Agency, Natalie Frost, and also Sue Ball, who is the Stock Services and Activities Manager at Staffordshire Libraries and Art Service. Welcome to you both.
Hello.
Hi, Natalie.
Glad you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Sue, are you with us?
I am, yes.
That's
I was
lovely.
just unmuting myself and my video.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, lovely to have you with us. Just to give an overview for those listening in, we're going to be looking at how and why Reading Friends was established back in 2017 and its development since, the role it's played during lockdown and how it has adapted, and how its importance has actually been brought into sharp focus over the last year, I'd say. We'll be looking at the national picture first with Natalie, and then hearing from Sue about how the scheme has been adopted and rolled out in her county service. We are inviting questions from listeners in this session. So if you have a question, please type it in the live chat in YouTube. Do say where you're watching us from today. Type your question, who it's for. Maybe it's one of our guests, maybe it's for both, and we'll select some of those to put to Sue and to Natalie. So Natalie, if I can start with you, please, and if I can take you back to Reading Friends scheme being created and the pilot phase, and what were the reasons behind it being formed?
Yeah, hi, afternoon everyone. Yeah, so I guess just to say about, I work for the Reading Agency, and the Reading Agency's mission is to tackle life's big challenges through the proven power of reading. And as part of this mission, we run programs to support mental health and wellbeing. And Reading Friends is trying to do this by tackling loneliness and social isolation through reading and sharing stories. Yeah, so going back quite a number of years. So basically, the Reading Agency was funded for 4 years by the National Lottery Community Fund to set up Reading Friends, and to test and to learn and to find out what it could become. And it built on the kind of success and feedback around the Reading Well dementia book list. So one of our own other programs, Reading Well. And Reading Friends was developed for people who were vulnerable, isolated, at risk of loneliness. Originally older people with dementia and carers were identified as those most at risk. And the lottery funding we received enabled us to co-produce the programme, working together with older people. But the programme, through the test projects and then through the pilot phase, through our different Reading Friends projects, started with becoming intergenerational with a mix of younger and older people involved. So that's a little bit of what the background and kind of where it started, and kind of then it's just been gradually developing and growing, and just to kind of tell everyone a little bit about where we have kind of been over the last year and where we are currently at. So Sue might be able to tell us as well a bit more from Staffordshire as well about what was happening kind of last year and what's happening now. But basically, since the pandemic, obviously everything to do with Reading Friends was in person before the pandemic. So all our groups, all our one-to-ones were in person. And we then needed to work on the distance models. So that's kind of very much obviously been our focus, and having things over the phone and online. And at the beginning of this year, DCMS, so the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, funded a rollout of the programme across public libraries in England, meaning that we were able to fund over 100 public libraries to be involved in the programme. So a significant government investment in the sector, kind of further demonstrating that their important role in COVID recovery. And this enabled us to test out Reading Friends with different audiences, as well as the different kind of distance delivery models, with us having Reading Friends activities taking place over the phone, in groups and in one-to-ones, online through Teams and Zoom, through Facebook groups, as well as some socially distanced activities. And there has been, more kind of research coming out about other groups that have been disproportionately affected by loneliness, not just older people, and as well as during the pandemic over the last year, especially younger people, new parents, and many others. Although many of our kind of library delivery partners at the moment have still reached a lot of older people, including home library service users, the funding has been a great opportunity to make a difference to a broad range of people and communities, including younger carers and refugees, isolated farming communities, as well as children and families. So it's very much been an expansion. And that's kind of where we are, where we've been. But I thought maybe I'll tell you a bit about kind of what Reading Friends is, for those people who may not know, and what it's about. So it's a social reading and befriending program that brings people together to share stories, make new friends, have fun using reading, whether books, magazines, newspapers, picture books, poetry, or anything else. And any kind of reading is used as a spark for conversation. The aim is to connect people socially. So Reading Friends is person-centered, it's building on interests and hobbies, and Reading Friends is managed by the reading agency, and it's delivered locally by community-based delivery partners through volunteers and staff who are reading befrienders, and obviously the government-funded rollout of the programme is very much focused on library authorities. The programme is flexible, as I've kind of mentioned a little bit, the fact it was face-to-face, and now it's over the phone in groups. It's as well as online, and we've had Facebook groups, and as well as a few socially distanced activities as well. So there's been a lot going on with the programme.
Yeah, thank you so much for that fantastic overview, Natalie. If I go back a little bit actually to some of the kind of the research that was done, I think in 2018, the reading agency commissioned research from Demos think tank, and that was to assess the potential impact of reading on loneliness, mental health problems, dementia, social immobility, and the report proposed reading as an effective intervention for social isolation and loneliness, as well as other big societal issues. And I wonder if you can give us a bit more about sort of the research that kind of gave the impetus for the Reading Friends scheme to be developed.
Yeah, so I mean, we obviously at the reading agency feel that reading has a key part to play in tackling loneliness and is supporting and improving mental health and well-being. It's not going to have all the answers. No initiative does by itself, but we really believe it's an important aspect in the battle against it. And probably everyone here knows or has seen the benefits of reading, as we're all champions. But so I mean, a bit about especially the impact of loneliness on mental and physical health of people across the UK. So it's kind of long been well documented as a public health concern. So if anyone hasn't seen the Campaign to End Loneliness website pages, there's one on threats to health. And there are, especially over the last year, there have been a lot of insightful reports about loneliness written from British Red Cross, Campaign to End Loneliness, especially one that I'm always kind of shouting about. It's the psychology of loneliness, talking about how loneliness affects us and how it negatively impacts our mental health. That's a really great report to read, because it really goes into the details of kind of temporary loneliness and chronic loneliness, which is incredibly kind of useful aspect to think about at the moment, because some of us might be just having temporary kind of feelings of loneliness, whereas for others it's chronic, and something that's very much ongoing, and it can really lead to a spiral where you lose your social connections, you then become anxious about social connections, and therefore it can lead obviously to other kind of conditions such as depression. So it's a really, really insightful report. So if anyone has a spare moment to read that, I definitely would look at that. The Red Cross as well reported it. So at the end of, so it was by November 2020, they did another survey, and they found out that 39% of UK adults said that they had not had a meaningful conversation with someone in a fortnight, and a third worried that something would happen to them and no one would notice, and 2 in 5 people said loneliness was having a negative impact on their mental health, which was quite a huge increase from the survey it did in May 2020. So yeah, I feel like since we kind of during the whole time that Reading Friends has been kind of developed and set up and delivered, issues around kind of social isolation and loneliness have really been kind of prominent in policy debates and public consciousness. So there was the setup of the Joe Cox Commission for Loneliness, there's a Loneliness Action Group, there's also regular APPGs as well, all party parliamentary groups on loneliness. The government strategy with a Let's Talk Loneliness campaign, where we're trying to, reduce the stigma around loneliness, talking about loneliness. And of course, events like this week with the Loneliness Awareness Week. So there's a lot out there about loneliness, and one thing that we kind of feel like over the last year is that the stigma around talking about loneliness has eased slightly. People are kind of able to speak a little bit more about it, but there's still much more to do, which is kind of why, as part of when we developed the Reading Friends program, we really wanted to make sure it had in its design those kind of key features in reducing loneliness. So the What Works Centre for Wellbeing states that the programs should have a tailored approach, flexible to the needs of individuals and groups, an asset-based approach to reducing the stigma around loneliness and being able to talk about it, opportunities to build meaningful connections, and new relationships built around shared interests and a sense of purpose for the individual. And so, yeah, this is all what we're trying to reflect in the programme.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And I would just echo that the Reading Agency website shares a great wealth of resources, those reports that Natalie was referring to, but also the evaluations and the impact reports from all the work from different library authorities around the country, which brings me to Sue. Sue, and can I ask when Staffordshire Libraries got involved with the Reading Friends scheme?
Yes, in March 2020, when the country went into lockdown and library buildings closed, library officers at Staffordshire County Council were redeployed into call centre work for food hubs, making telephone calls to those who were shielding because they were clinically extremely vulnerable. And it soon became evident to us that many of the people that we spoke to were lonely, they were isolated, and they were really frightened. And it dawned on us that actually Reading Friends could really help, and we could adapt it as a telephone model. So we approached the Reading Agency and we put our proposals to them, and they were really supportive and said, yes, this is really going to help in this current situation. And as lockdown continued, national concern about the impact of social isolation on people's health and well-being grew. And local authorities were requested by central government and the NHS to identify people who were lonely and to establish a chit and chat scheme. So the library was able to incorporate chit and chat into the Reading Friends telephone model, addressing County Council priorities around combating social isolation. and also saving the council both time and money, because they didn't have to set up a new scheme. We were already delivering it. So since then, we've continued to develop it and to grow the scheme with different organisations. We were really fortunate to get some DCMS funding through the Reading Agency to expand the scheme, and we've been continuing with the telephone calls.
That's great. And it's evident then that you've got some really strong cross-county service partnerships in place then to make that happen, because one of the questions is, how do you find out about those people? How do those people find out about you and what you can offer? Can you tell us a bit more about that, Sue?
Yeah, I think I'm a really big fan of top tips. So one of my top tips is around looking at what the local priorities are for the county council, and seeing how Reading Friends could be part of that solution. And then what are the pathways that are already in existence? And for us, it was the call centre. The call centre work. So we were able to chat to the key people in the county council who had firstly set up the call centre work, and talk to them about how Reading Friends could help. And they were really, quite excited about it and could see how this could really support county council priorities. In terms of that DCMS funding, we are doing Reading Friends with a refuge, Staffordshire Women's Aid. And again, this is a new partnership. We'd started in December working with them around the cost of coffee and the Reading Agency gifting a book scheme. And we were chatting to the organisers of the refuge, and we said, what do you think about Reading Friends? Do you think this is something that could support the women, if they're feeling, especially during this pandemic? And of course at the time we were in our second and third lockdowns, and they said, oh yeah, we really love that idea, and we think it could be a way of really connecting these women and their families back into the community and making links with local libraries, so that once libraries start to open and recover, those families in the refuge could start, feel safe coming to the library and feel quite confident using the library facilities. So I think that what's really important is, what are those existing pathways? What are the priorities locally? And how can Reading Friends be part of that solution?
Thank you, Sue. And I'm delighted to say that our library friends in the live chat are saying that Amanda from Blackpool, for instance, she says they're really pleased with the positive impact that Reading Friends is having on the residents there in Blackpool. It's a brilliant scheme. Kirsty from Derbyshire says they're really pleased too with the impact Reading Friends is having on Derbyshire Home Library and listening group clients in Derbyshire. So it's really nice to have that success and that impact echoed by the people who are watching today. There's a question as well here, and I suppose this goes back to potentially when libraries reopen and groups can socially gather together in real space. And that's from Rachel from Warwickshire, who asks, what makes Reading Friends different from a standard book group? And perhaps if I can go back to Natalie and ask, what is the difference in those models?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's around the flexibility and how our principles. So it's, we kind of feel that there's no kind of pressure. You don't need to have read something before you come, which and once, so it means it's quite accessible for people who have less time, or anyone who has any kind of conditions that they're living with, whether that's dementia or anything else. So having kind of something, a short extract. I mean, poetry has worked kind of in majority of projects and sessions. It's a great thing. She can have a short poem at the beginning, and then you can have a little discussion and chat. And what we really feel is that it's about kind of people connecting with each other about their feelings, their experiences. And so what we kind of try to do is have some kind of different discussion questions and things, so that you can with like the resources that we've created, so that it kind of widens it up. It's the reading is the spark for the connection, and for people getting to know each other, for chatting, for talking about their opinions, their feelings, their experiences. So poetry's worked really well, and also children's books have been really useful. So being able to talk about what you read as a child, or what you read to your children, and is it the same, and is there is there now a film made or a TV series of the stories now? So it's a little bit more of a flexible opening up of reading, meaning anything, any different types. So like magazines, we've had like a group that comes together and looks at magazine stories. And
thank you, Natalie. I think that's key to remember, isn't it? Reading is the spark which brings these people together. I'm going to come on to Sue, actually, as some fantastic examples from Staffordshire, but Joanne from Nottinghamshire in the live chat says they found that customers really enjoyed being read to over the phone for their Reading Friends session. I know that's, Sue, what was happening with your phone lines as part of your Reading Friends as well. And Staffordshire was highlighted by the lottery Good Causes back in October, and it featured a story about Denise and Monica and how poems built a lockdown friendship. Can you tell us a little bit more about that one, or some other lovely local examples to share?
Yes, definitely. I mean, Denise was caring for her husband. She was quite depressed. We were in a very difficult situation, and she wasn't going out. And Monica got in touch with her, and gradually developed a friendship and a rapport with her. And one of the things that Denise liked was, being read to. Listening to poems, listening to Monica read, and she really, really looked forward to Monica actually calling on a regular basis to speak to her. And Monica says, well, we're friends for life now as a result of that, which is a really lovely story, and I think really boosted Denise's well-being.
Yeah, and we've spoken about the impact on the kind of the participants, the people in the Reading Friends schemes. But Sue, can you just say, we've got a couple of minutes left, can you just say what the impact has been on staff, library staff, how they've taken to being part of that process and those relationship building, and volunteers, I assume, as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the staff, and I speak for myself as well, we were thrown into redeployed roles, and you read the news and everybody was feeling anxious about what does the future hold, and what sort of service will we offer. And in terms of Reading Friends, I think it gave us all a sense of purpose, and really was really personally rewarding as well. So you actually felt as though you made a difference to people's lives. I've got a coordinator that manages Reading Friends, Terry Heath, and Terry was telling me one person that he did Reading Friends with was a bit of a grumpy old man, shall we say. But what Terry did was he persevered with him, and he found out his interests, the sort of things that he was interested in, and they used to spend a lot of time actually talking about that, and local history and times gone by as well. And when it came to sort of towards the end of the Reading Friends sessions, and the country was gradually opening up, the gentleman thanked Terry and said, thank you for just being patient with a grumpy old devil, was what he called himself. He said, and he admitted that a lot of his anger and frustration was because he was afraid and quite fearful. And, you know, Terry said it just made him feel really good to have helped that gentleman.
That's lovely. And I think that's a really perfect note for us to end on, actually, Sue, a bright note. And I know that it's the reading agency's scheme, both Reading Well, which, you know, needs to be sought out by people. Go and have a look at the website. Those are books. Initiative to help understand and manage your own mental health and well-being through predominantly non-fiction reading, but the books are chosen and recommended by health experts, as well as people living with the conditions covered by the topics. And you can find book lists at the Reading Agency website there. It just leaves me to say it is a bright future for the scheme, for Reading Friends. It has grown. I suppose it's sad we need it, but it's there. And it's going to grow from strength to strength. And I would just like to say a huge thank you to Natalie and to Sue for sharing those insights and experiences with us this afternoon. And I'm going to hand back to Jonathan for the next session. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can I echo what a wonderfully heartwarming session that was. I suppose we have to remind ourselves that at the bottom, so much of our work is making people happier. An unusual notion, perhaps, but certainly a good one for us to get behind. Our next session is titled Bookshop, Bubbles and Browsers, and it's bringing together people who've been involved both in libraries and the work they've done in lockdown, and also the work that independent bookshops are doing, particularly to tackle well-being and so on. So I'm delighted to bring onto screen my three guests, Deborah Ulmer, Janine Downs and Sarah Mullin, all of whom will unmute and start up their cameras and will be revealed splendidly on screen. Janine, you're very welcome. Deborah, hello, nice to see you. And Sarah, tastefully backlit. Very good to see you all. Thank you very much for joining us. We've got about 20 minutes or so to talk about the work you've been doing. I know that Deborah and Sarah are working in bookshops. I've made bookshops happen. And Janine is working for Staffordshire, for Worcestershire's libraries. Worcestershire, yes, I read my notes there. Thank you for catching me out on that. So I'm going to start very quickly with Deborah to say a little bit, Deborah, about your bookshop. It's more than just that, of course, and to what extent the well-being is an important factor in the work you do with people. Over to you, Deborah.
Hello, Jonathan. Delighted to be here. For those of you who don't know or haven't heard about the Poetry Pharmacy, it's a bookshop and more than a bookshop, as Jonathan described, on the Welsh borders in Shropshire, and developed out of something I was doing called Emergency Poet, where I drove around in a vintage ambulance dressed as a doctor prescribing poetry to people. So explicitly for well-being, and then I got too old and tired to be driving that, and set up the Poetry Pharmacy, which during this last year, it was set up to be a kind of mini centre for poetry and well-being, so explicitly that. But over the last year, because of various lockdowns, it's become mostly a bookshop with a cafe. So the events, the reading groups, the workshops that were planned haven't happened, and we're quite new. So, but it absolutely has well-being at its heart, and it's laid out unusually for a bookshop in that it has a section on first aid, on books for first aid, including it's poetry books on the whole, but also books on general well-being, books on nature. The novel Cure is there. I don't know which are books that fiction that's recommended for well-being. But I think the key thing almost is that the shop is laid out by emotional ailment, and they're described not by the problem but by the solution. So there's a section on grief or ill health, but they're described as be alive every moment of your life, which is a line from a poem, rather than ill health. And on those shelves you'll find poetry that addresses those things, but also books on well-being, philosophy, psychology, and at the heart of it, there's a kind of lightness of touch as well. So there's humour there as well. So it's not very heavy, if that makes sense.
Well, that's a wonderful introduction, and I can say that it is a splendid place to go. I came away having spent far too much money on it. But actually, the way you describe it, the variety, the range of things that come together, it is very like a library. And of course, one of the pleasures of libraries is that we go in for one thing and we end up, as I so often do, coming out of the books on flags of many nations because we think that's what we really need. And sometimes that is what we need. Now, we're going to talk about libraries in a little moment to Janine from Worcestershire Libraries, but let's go first of all to Sarah Mullin. So Sarah, you've been involved in literature activities for young people particularly, but recently you've taken the bold and one might say reckless decision to open a bookshop during a time of national crisis. Can you tell us about that, and to what extent Wellbeing was something that influenced your decision?
Yes, yeah. So I really want to visit Deborah's shop because it sounds amazing, and I feel like ours is very uncreative in comparison to how we lay out our shop. But we'd sort of been dabbling with the idea of having a bookshop, an independent bookshop, for a while, and done a little bit of a trial run. And then it's actually housed in a community hub building, which I've run for about 6 years. And when the pandemic struck, the community hub side of things sort of pivoted to provide emergency food parcels and lots of kind of frontline community support for the local community. And then after lockdown one and sort of reopening of society, we had a building that was empty and we couldn't do any of the usual kind of groups and activities. So we thought we'd bring the bookshop sort of centre stage and see how it fared. So we sort of relaunched it on the 1st of October last year. And then obviously open and shut, open and shut, open and shut. But the response was absolutely phenomenal from the local community. And we basically run it on a very relational basis. So I think a lot of shopping these days is transactional, and certainly bigger shops and chains really don't even want to interact with you at all. Witnessed by the self-service till and the lack of staff around to ask or engage with, and we operate on a totally different basis where we're really seeking to get to know our customers, actually have conversations with people around books, and make it a very relationship-based business. And that seems to work really well. And we also, unusually perhaps for a city bookshop, have a very strong nature section and a section on wellbeing, which is very well used and loved. Yes, and of course your bookshop is in a really beautiful part of the city of Birmingham. All of Birmingham's beautiful, but yours is a particularly beautiful part. And I know that there were some shifts in the way in which the library service was provided within the city, which to some extent helped create an opportunity for you to do the work you're doing. I'm going to move quickly on now to Janine. We'll have a chance to talk to both Deborah and Sarah in a moment as well. And I'm going to ask Janine to say a little bit about the programmes of work that have happened in Worcestershire in response to lockdown. And of course, I'm very keen to know about how you managed to engage with your audience, given the fact that suddenly we didn't have the kind of interactions that Sarah described of people being friendly faces behind counters. You want to tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing, Janine?
Yeah, so obviously when the first lockdown hit, we had to close libraries. So we were closed for several months. But in Worcestershire, we reopened on the first day we could. I think we were kind of chomping at the bit. We were desperate to see our customers. So that was early July. And then, but since that time, obviously, we all know we've been in and out of various different, we've all experienced this, what next, what next month, in and out of different tiers. And although the library's been open, it's been open to different degrees. So we've had click and collect, which would be customers being able to reserve books and then come and collect them from the library. We've done book bundles, which are staff selecting a bundle of books, particularly for children, younger children who kind of read quite voraciously and get through those quickly. We've been open for PC access, so that was in those kind of essential times. So that was our skeleton service that we've run since early July. And then in between times when we were allowed to, we've been open for browsing. for periods of 20 minutes or more if capacity allowed. And then very recently, just last week or the week before maybe, we're now open with unlimited browsing, and we're not quarantining books anymore. So over that period, our numbers have really been rocketing in the last few weeks, as I think more normality feels like it's returning, and we're open for longer. So people have got the message that we're there. But even when we were open, we weren't getting huge numbers of customers in. People were still nervous, they weren't vaccinated. So we weren't seeing our customers. And I think we realized that in October, even though we had relatively comparatively little restriction at that point, we were still getting quite low numbers in libraries and low engagement. So we wanted to make sure that we were seeing those customers who might benefit from our services. And one of the things that we had run prior to lockdown was something called Connect Cafes, where we host social connecting activity in libraries. That might be a book group, or it might be a language cafe, often run by partners. So it could be a carers support group. And we were very conscious that those groups were not seeing each other, were not meeting necessarily. So we created an online forum, fora, in which they could connect. And they were our bubbles. So that began in earnest in November. And we went out to our library team, asked who of them had knowledge and skills around anything really. So we did focus on books to some degree. We have a crime book bubble, a sci-fi book bubble. We've got a book chat and a digital readers group bubble. So a range of Hagley book group, had some local book groups. We supported them to shift online as well. But we also added to that with knowledge around photography or history, local history, a really wide range of topics. Going out to the team, asking them who had knowledge and interest in an area. And we basically created an online forum, an online space, which was using Zoom, in which people could connect in relatively small groups of up to about 20. And they were really successful. they just took off. So they were often fully booked. We then introduced children's bubbles. So we had we shifted our Chatterbooks online, and baby bubble we have. So really kind of pushing it to the online space. So yeah, just phenomenal engagement really around something that we wouldn't have imagined that we would have done before lockdown. I think we all, had to learn to use Zoom suddenly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was basically a way of us continuing to connect socially with our customers, and for them to connect with each other as well. So we saw really positive impacts from that. So a huge amount of positive response from our customers, and a desire for that to continue.
Great, wonderful. I mean, what's so heartening is the fact that once you revert to using the enthusiasms of individual members of staff, suddenly you open up this great resource, which perhaps hadn't been called upon on a day-to-day basis. And that's also reflected, I know, in the work that Deborah and Sarah have done, the fact that if it wasn't for their personal enthusiasm, none of this would have happened. And at a certain point, it's useful to just remind ourselves that we are all at the bottom enthusiasts for books and reading and so on. A question for all of you, and this may have to be our last one because we are, as ever, running out of time, is to ask, I'll start with Deborah first of all, whether there is anything that you've experienced in responding to lockdown which you feel has been enormously positive and which you will try and maintain even once these restrictions have gone. And I'll ask the same question to Sarah and Janine, but perhaps Deborah could answer first of all.
It's difficult. I mean, I'm not very good online. I find it an uncomfortable space. I mean, some people are better than others. And the benefit for me for lockdown is that I became a better bookseller. I had some time to kind of consolidate what I was doing and make the bookshop the focus. Because what I want to do now is to actually have real world groups, book groups for different communities. We're going to set one up for people who experience rural loneliness, another for an LGBTQ plus group, of which there are very few in Shropshire. So it's given me time to plan. It's what it's also done has made me realise how, even though we're new, how quickly we've become an important focus for people to come and sit and chat. We have a coffee shop as well, and we're part of the community already, and so that's really encouraging.
Yes, and it sounds like you will be certainly taking some things from the lockdown experience, even though I know you, as you say, you favour real space, and real space is great. Of course, you're in a very a part of the region which is a long way from other parts. I suppose everywhere is in a way, but you have a low population locally and so on. So but potentially people have to travel a long way to find similar types of engagement. So you are providing that to a rural community that wouldn't otherwise have it. Sarah, to ask a similar question to you about what you feel you've learned, particularly in terms of well-being from the lockdown experience and what you might continue to deliver.
Just how important books are to people. I think many people had sort of thought that books were, I think they'd forgotten how important books were. And I think it's been really heartening to see people finding solace in books and finding books as a source of well-being, whether that is poetry or gardening or learning to cook from scratch or learning to cook a different cuisine or whatever it might be, there's different kind of mindful activities. So I've been personally very heartened by the revival in the printed word and books to find solace. I think, like Deborah, I prefer real space, real time, real people, real connections, and that's why we're absolutely delighted to be open again, and being able to have those kind of conversations in person is fantastic. We're one of the 7% of independent bookshops in the country that doesn't have its own e-commerce website. So I think for us, bookshop.org and Hive, which are both sort of e-commerce platforms, have been really, really important. But particularly bookshop.org has been very interesting because it's allowed us to be creative and kind of curate lists of reading lists for people. And I've just enjoyed being able to think laterally and think creatively. And so to just give you an example, I just reflected the other day how many children's books have got mice as central characters. And it's a disproportionate amount of books have got a mouse as the central character. And so I'm busy curating a list at the moment called Ode to Mice. And I just love the fact that we can do that and have that freedom, and also approaching different people during lockdown 3 and sort of saying, would you like to curate a list for us? And everybody who's done it has really enjoyed it. So that's been really positive and really creative at a time when everything was very bedded down.
Yes, I mean, it does sound like the role of somebody who's running a small bookshop is changing. That idea of being creative in a way you create what you offer to people, not just about what can we stack high and what can we sell cheap, but how can we use our knowledge? And then what you're saying about how can you use the knowledge and enthusiasm of your customers and your readers to help generate more enthusiasm. We need to remind it, of course, that everybody assumes books are special in a way. It's not a normal engagement with commerce. So I'm going to come back to Janine about that, because I mean, particularly you've mentioned how you got this sudden flourishing of enthusiasm for certain discrete areas. Are you going to be able to continue that when lockdown eventually is a distant memory, if that is ever the time?
Yeah, we're looking to do that. It's hard because resourcing it is challenging now that we're open. Staff are deployed elsewhere. But what we found is that we've developed this really interesting community of people who are engaging online. And historically, they would have been associated with one library, but now they're actually connected across the county. And in fact, because we promote our activities on Eventbrite, we've got the odd one from California and from Sri Lanka. So we've actually inadvertently created an international community around this. So there is definitely a desire for them to continue from amongst that community. And we're now going out and seeking their involvement. I think you alluded to this, Sarah, in keeping that going and in kind of supporting the curation of it, really, and shaping what it might look like going forward. So very much hoping to do so, looking for community support to do that alongside our staff support. But I would say that, as you mentioned, Jonathan, the benefits, and I think Deborah as well, the benefits to staff of doing something different in this moment was huge. I think it was Sue actually in the last section. The well-being benefits for staff of engaging in this was equally impactful as for the customers, I would say. So not to be forgotten there as well. So we're looking for ways to continue.
Yes, that is an important point, and of course it was alluded to in the earlier presentation, the fact that of course staff want to do good work, and bookshop owners, yes, they want to sell books, but also they want people to be pleased with the books they're receiving and to be surprised by joy. I think that might be Wordsworth. He could have worked in a bookshop, and that is lovely. We've got a couple of minutes, maybe 1 minute each perhaps, just to ask you if there are any instances you can recall, not necessarily over the immediate time, but just in the work you've done within your bookshops and within the library service, where this kind of engagement has made a really significant difference to somebody, and that they have communicated the value of that to you. Obviously, I'm thinking about the fact that we want to evidence that well-being can be, demonstrably improved by engaging with books and bookshops and books and libraries. I'll start with Deborah again. Sorry to put you on the spot, Deborah, but do you have examples of this you could mention?
There are loads of examples. I mean, I think the thing that springs to mind really is that we've had a lovely ex-bookseller, actually, Anna Drader, who has been running excuse me, a series of poetry breakfasts every month in the poetry pharmacy, and they have coffee and croissant and read poetry to each other. And we've had sort of on average 20 people coming, and I'm running around serving coffee, but I listen to quite often people who are very lonely, listening to, I mean, in tears with listening to beautiful works of literature being read to them, or being able to share that, and that's been really moving, and it'll be nice to start those up again.
Yeah, okay, that's lovely, and great to know that you're keeping your coffee serving skills up to scratch.
Thanks.
Sarah, you've had slightly less time with your bookshop, and obviously not that much time with the doors open, but you virtually are in real space. Are there examples of people who are definitely improving their well-being by coming into your spaces?
Yeah, we have regularly people coming back to us saying that a book has really moved them or helped them, or just touched them. But I think also I want to say that actually coming to a shop at all, or coming to a bookshop at all, where you receive a friendly welcome, and we really try to kind of get to know people by name and get to know what interests them. But we had a profoundly disabled lady who came in who'd been shielding for over a year. We were the first shop she had visited since the pandemic began, and she was visibly very moved about coming into the space, feeling welcome, feeling safe, and having the opportunity to browse physical books in a physical bookshop, and had obviously really missed having that opportunity, but it was crucial for her that she felt safe to be able to do that, physically safe. And it was a very moving moment on the bookshop floor to be there when that happened, and yeah, so it isn't necessary. It is also about what people read and what they reflect on as they read, and they come back and share that with us. And that's one of the things I absolutely love about running a bookshop, is when people come back and say, my granddaughter absolutely loved that book, or I bought this book from you 2 weeks ago and it's really, really helped me as I process the grief that I'm going through. But also the opportunity to provide safe space for people, and that kind of third place. It's not work, it's not home, but it's a safe space for people to come into. It's very important for people.
Yes, we underestimated, I think, the feelings we get when we went back into these spaces, not just because they were familiar spaces, but just to suddenly feel we could quietly spend time looking at the books again. And in the case of me in the poetry pharmacy, spending vast sums of money. You're
welcome.
For a while.
You're always welcome to spend vast sums of money, Jonathan. I'm feeling left out that you haven't come and spent vast sums of money with me.
I will come to your book. You're only a few miles away. I should get on my bike and visit you. Janine, I see in my own life libraries as being the original safe space. I spent quite a lot of my childhood hiding from the big boys by being in the library, and it was a great place for me. I still do that, in fact. Are there instances you've had just now as you're starting to open up where you can really point to how you have helped people's well-being by the service you're offering?
daily. Countless examples of that, and I think that tears, people coming in, so grateful. Even just a couple of weeks ago when we opened up for browsing and for people to be able to sit down, because prior to that it was all bookable study spaces, so it felt quite contained and quite structured. So yeah, absolutely, I think we know that it's been really impactful. But I'm because we've talked about the physical space, I am going to just mention the digital. And I think that some of the examples we've had that we wouldn't have encountered otherwise, because we didn't have a digital offer, of people who are disabled, who are caring for elderly parents who can't get out of the house easily, regardless, COVID or not, have actually said, thank you for doing this. This is my only connection with people. I can't speak, so I engage by chat. I wouldn't have been able to do that in a real life environment. So I think that whilst I, like you, Sarah and Deborah, much prefer the physical spaces, there is something to be gained from this digital space as well, which I think is not to be forgotten.
Yeah, wonderful. That's a very nice note to finish on. We've had a terrible time in many ways, and many people have had a very, very terrible time. But also we have develop new ways of being close to people, and we don't want to let go of all of those. And I echo what you said about people feeling that suddenly they can communicate in a safe way. Thank you, Janine, Deborah and Sarah, for a really delightful and infusing and engaging talk with me. I'm so delighted. I'll let you put your cameras and microphones to mute, but thank you for your time. And we're now going to move on to our next presentation. So goodbye to our three lovely speakers. So we're moving swiftly on. We're going to be discussing for the next 20-25 minutes the issue of readers returning to libraries physically and potentially digitally as well, just re-establishing those connections. And I'm going to ask to reveal themselves on camera my two guests, Catherine Mann, who's Libraries and Arts Manager from Staffordshire Libraries and Arts Service, and Caroline Ray, who is from Newham Libraries in London. Caroline and Catherine, you're both very welcome. If you want to unmute yourselves, we can engage in conversation. Lovely. Thank you for joining us. This particular session, we wanted to talk about exactly how we've managed the unlockdown. Obviously, it's now quite common for people to say locking down felt comparatively easy because we just closed and walked away, and that's what we were told to do. But unlocking, of course, is more complicated. I'm going to ask you both to say a bit about how your services responded to that situation. And I'll start with Catherine, but also when I come to you, Caroline, I know you're going to talk a bit about how London as a whole has responded, some generic projects that you're working on with the other 32 other London authorities. But Catherine, you've got a role in Staffordshire, of course, very senior role, but you're also involved in Libraries Connected with the West Midlands. So would you like to say a bit about the challenge you faced when trying to bring readers back?
I think part of the challenge has always been the uncertainty, really, in terms of doing things that's in line with the government roadmap. We've had really good support from Libraries Connected in terms of having a national toolkit that we can use. And certainly the approach that we've taken in Staffordshire, I guess, has been quite steady and incremental, so that we are, ensuring that our staff still feel safe and that our customers still feel safe, and that we're not doing too much too quickly. But it's that gradual shift, and I think what we've now got is very much a blended offer. So just thinking about what Janine just talked about in terms of that digital space, there are aspects of the offer that we shifted during lockdown very, very quickly in terms of how we adapted the digital space that we've got. And there are things that we wouldn't now want to let go of. Click and collect, for example, has been hugely successful for so many library services, and it's looking to see what we can continue to maintain from that lockdown offer, but at the same time, how we can blend that going forward with gradually reintroducing aspects of the service, and in particular, how we can bring people back into our library buildings, because I firmly believe that physical space is a safe space, and we do want to see it animated. But I think what we will have to do is to take quite a proactive approach in terms of rebuilding confidence, because our footfall dropped so significantly. Even as we start to recover the library offer, it's how we can get that back up to a sort of pre-COVID, not completely pre-COVID level, but certainly an improvement on where we are now.
well, I hope we can build back better and get better audiences. We never know. But it is extraordinary, and I'll come on to Caroline in a moment, but we are talking ourselves about making sure people feel libraries are a safe space, because I think most of us would have said, going back 2 years, they were the original safe space. Most people felt comfortable in a library space. You were allowed to browse, you were allowed to nod off if you so choose. You didn't have to buy anything. It was a really nice space. So let me come to Caroline now to ask you a bit about how you've responded in your particular service, but also the plans that London has as a whole to start to bring readers back into libraries. Caroline, welcome.
Okay, thank you. So I think a bit as Catherine had said, Libraries Connected did provide this toolkit for the entire sector, which was really useful and not replicated in other similar services, I think. So I think similarly to Catherine, when we reopened last July, it was all a bit slow and steady. We spent a lot of time with staff beforehand, making sure they were happy with risk assessments and how we laid the space out, and then a lot of new policies and procedures written, which feels so the opposite of what we've been doing in libraries for years. We feel like we're throwing up all these barriers. Everyone's now standing behind a perspex screen. People are being stopped at the door, for test and trace, and people have been told to walk in a certain direction through the library, and you can stay for a certain amount of time. So it does feel quite a number of barriers are in place, and it will be nice to get those barriers to go. We took the decision in Newham as we know, the country kind of unlocked last summer, and then very quickly from September onwards we were finding out that actually things weren't going in the right direction, and for London and the southeast, and I think some other places around the country, really from the end of October we locked right back down again, because as we came out the lockdown at the end of November, then all the different restrictions came into place for London, and we were all shut down again, and they closed all the shops on the Saturday just before Christmas while everyone was out Christmas shopping, and the announcement said, sorry, London's closed. It was a bit like, and then obviously we've been more or less locked down since then, but in Newham we took the decision to be as open as we could be. So I think in our terminology we never talked about the library service being closed. We said we're open, but this is what we can offer, and it's click and collect, it's some PCs for essential use. So we just tried to keep that that narrative going, really, that we were open and we were doing our best to keep both staff and customers safe. And I think, but I mean, as Catherine said, I mean, everybody's footfall has fallen, and I think across the country we're about 20% of where we were pre-COVID times, and that's where we're starting to come up to again in April, May time. We have seen from April to May starting to be a reasonable increase in people coming through. So I'd say all of our stats are kind of going up in terms of footfall and books being issued, which is great. And yeah, it's just taking that forwards now. I think we all thought we were going to be doing a lot more from next Monday, and we're now not doing a lot more from next Monday.
Yes, it's definitely been stop-start, of course, and I think we probably, where I am in the West Midlands, we'd forgotten how particularly tough it was for London. But before I go on to ask another question, just a reminder for everybody watching, if you want to ask any questions or make any comments about any of our conversations we're having this afternoon, you can use the chat on the YouTube, and my colleagues will relay them to me via an array of screens which are sitting in front of me. I'm going to ask you to focus a little bit on, in Catherine's case, on the fact that you are working within Staffordshire. It's a mixed county in terms of being both rural and urban. Do you think that being in a county with quite a number of libraries in sometimes quite small locations, is that presenting a different set of challenges to reopening? Are people perhaps more relaxed when they're not in a dense urban area because it hasn't affected them so directly in terms of the virus?
I think it's difficult, isn't it, really? Because, we always say across Staffordshire, it's not a one size fits all. We've got 43 libraries that are hugely different in terms of the communities that they serve. But one of the things that we have found as we've started to recover is just how proactive our community managed libraries have been in terms of their real keenness to get things re-established. And for us, you know, for some of the things that we've reintroduced, it's the community managed libraries and the volunteers that have led the way, really, because they know that local community, often live in that local community. So whether that's helped them feel a little bit safer, a little bit more confident. So Shenstone, for example, started off our first baby bounce and rhyme sessions. They did that outdoors. Homecroft, another community managed library, did the same. And the really nice thing about the Homecroft community managed library baby bounce session, there were 7 babies came to that session. 5 of them had actually been born during lockdown. So it's a real opportunity then for those parents of young children to connect. So I do think it may have been an advantage that we've not been part of a sort of a huge urban conurbation, I guess, and we've always just been on the edge of what's been happening in Birmingham, and certainly Birmingham, Warwickshire and Coventry and Solihull were quite badly impacted when we started to lock back down again. So I think having that rural community has helped, and what we've tried to do as well is get our mobile library service back on the road, visiting the stops that are there for longer, but obviously not the teeny stops where they're just serving one person and then on to the next. So yes, it is a mixed approach.
Yeah, I mean, that does a lovely picture you present there of babies being introduced to books outdoors. Hopefully the weather was not inclement, but also it reminds us that in the 18th and 19th century, ordinary people had to get their engagement with literature and culture in very much the same way. You know, woodland schools and so on. We didn't have municipal buildings to welcome us. So perhaps we are re-engaging in that process of reminding ourselves actually how important engaging with books and libraries and people is. So Caroline, the other side of the question, really, you obviously were in one of the world's greatest cities with an incredible density of population and a lot of flow of people, and I imagine lots and lots of different communities who react differently to COVID. Do you want to say a little bit about the special challenges that presents for you in Newham and further afield?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things about London is it's so large that actually each of the boroughs is quite, and within the boroughs, we're all quite distinctive in some ways. I think being an East End borough, we were obviously very early on hit quite hard by the pandemic, and we have large numbers of population who have poorer outcomes if they do contract the virus. So I think it's always been very present for us, and our library staff have been very heavily involved with the work with public health, as they have all over the country. But I think even now, you know, that we're still out in the streets promoting vaccination and helping with surge testing when it happens and things like that. So I think that can create a lot of fear for people. Because they're aware, they watch the news, they see that in your local area that at one point we had the highest numbers in the country. I know that changed throughout the pandemic, and probably everyone had a little turn to being the highest number, but yeah, that does just make it a little bit more challenging for people when they're going out, and you certainly do get the questions of how do we know it's safe in the library, what are you doing to keep us safe? Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes or so I just want to move the discussion slightly on a bit. First of all, to ask you both, we'll start with Catherine again, whether you feel that within your local authority structure, which is obviously a political structure as well, whether there's been a renewed understanding of the value of libraries, not just for offering people books, but for the other benefits that come with that, the well-being that we've heard of and so on. Catherine, do you feel that things might be slightly easier in the future when it comes to saying we need resources to make sure we can carry on engaging with people?
Absolutely. I think during the pandemic, the library service have really raised their profile within the local authority. And I think one of the ways that we did that initially was the way in which library staff were quickly redeployed into other roles. And I think it really showed their flexibility in terms of how adaptable they were. And it's also enabled our libraries team to build wider contact across the organisation, within public health, for example, within the strategic development team. So I think that really set us off on a good foot. But also, I think having had those conversations with public health colleagues and also other colleagues, they can see that libraries really are that front door of the county council, and that there are opportunities for us to do so many other things through that. So, for example, our libraries in Staffordshire are collection points for the lateral flow tests. We're also donation points for people that are donating digital devices. So I think that then helps in terms of future conversations, that the wider local authority can see that we are able to deliver, we're able to respond really quickly, we're also really proactive in then what we do to promote that offer. So I think really they're pushing an open door and vice versa, because again, it's enabled us to attract some additional funding through that. And I think having that close relationship with public health really does help us to sort of showcase how libraries really can make a difference around supporting wellbeing outcomes. I know Sue was on this call earlier, Sue Ball from Staffordshire, talking about Reading Friends, and because we can then show the outcomes that we've achieved through some of our projects, I think that really does help people to take us seriously.
Yes, yes. I mean, we're all aware of how easy it is for people outside library services to misunderstand what library services are about, and to fall back into the old cliche of whatever they might think a library is about. Although, of course, one of the things libraries have always been good at, and you will both know this, is good at talking to people. And at the end of the day, if you're good at communicating and you're friendly and you're welcoming and you're generally trying to help people, that's a very positive message. And it's not always the message people get from every aspect of a local authority. Caroline, the political situation, funding and so on in London is probably, in Newham, is probably very different from that in Staffordshire. They're very different local authority areas. How do you feel that the situation you've been through will help you or affect you in the future when it comes to supporting new work?
I think actually just really echoing a lot of what Catherine said. I think one, yes, our staff being redeployed, but not only when did they get redeployed out to doing these really crucial roles, but they were just fantastic ambassadors for us. Everyone kind of realised how good they were at doing those roles, whether it was phoning up to check whether people had enough food and, you know, to sort out that delivery, or actually then going into those food distribution hubs and working at that. They were such all-rounders that kind of wherever they were getting redeployed, that they did a good job. And yeah, we had a little bit of a tussle with HR towards the end to say we really need them back, and they're going, but they're really great, and that's why we need them back, because they're great. But yeah, I mean, in a very similar way, it's really helped, and I'm sure it's the same for a number of services throughout the council. We all had to adapt to working in a very different way very quickly, and really got to know people in other services much better. So yeah, so that ability of us to be involved, you know, involved in work in early years, and you know, I'm helping on we've got a talking and communication strategy being developed, which is fantastic to, you know, for libraries to be working with early years people on that. We are doing a massive push in our summer reading challenge this year by being able to work with pupil services and getting buy-in from information governments that actually we have a legitimate interest to join every single primary school child to the library service, which is just fantastic, because we're about to join 36,000 children, which is great, because pre-pandemic we had about 50% of them as active library members, and that's gone right down in the last year. So you know, but that kind of buy-in, we've got an active engagement with 65 out of 70 local primary schools. And that's just amazing to be able to do that. I think everybody really sees the value of the library service. And I feel like on a daily basis now, it's from across the council where I'm getting people communicate and go, oh, actually, we need to do this. Could we do it in the library space? Could we come in? So yeah, it's been really good for that.
That's fantastic. And of course, we haven't particularly mentioned the fact that libraries have also had a role of providing good, solid information. And given that we've got an ongoing issue to make sure people pick up the right messages and don't pick up the wrong messages. Intrinsically, we know people trust library staff to give them unbiased advice and point them in the right direction. And I imagine health authorities and so on are thinking, you know, these people are really, really useful for us. That's lovely to hear from both of you. maybe my final question, we've got a few minutes, and it's on a slightly darker note, really. You've alluded to the fact that staff were working at a distance from people who had to have new systems and so on. And of course, one of the things that hovers above us or around us all the time in this situation is that anybody who's engaging with the public is putting themselves at a special risk. People working in supermarkets are, we know health service staff are, but equally people working for local authorities and in public libraries are. Have either of you had any particular issues with staff just feeling that they are themselves, understandably, very, very reluctant to go back into real space? And Catherine, perhaps I could start with you.
I don't think staff have been reluctant, but I do think at times staff have had concerns. And what we've done, as Caroline alluded to earlier, we have risk assessed everything. And I appreciate that risk assessments don't cover it, but we've looked at different processes, we've looked at risk assessments, we've got screens up, and we've done what we can, worked with our health and safety colleagues, worked with our staff themselves to really reassure people. And I guess as a result of that, we have taken that really slow, steady approach in Staffordshire. So, you know, there have been aspects of recovery that we could have done perhaps a little bit sooner, but trying to make sure that we're doing that at a steady pace. We also at one point stopped sending staff on relief so that they weren't working in different libraries. So that also had an impact on us in terms of, you know, how readily we could keep the doors open, because it meant that we didn't have that flexibility. So we have really tried hard, you know, to really understand what those concerns are from staff, because it is very real if people have got vulnerable relatives at home that they're concerned for. We've also introduced a system of, and this was before the lateral flow testing became more readily available, we did introduce a system of testing for our library staff. It's a lot easier to access those tests now through the blue boxes that you can pick up in any number of different places. But again, just trying to look at what we could do to make the staff feel as safe as possible. Yeah,
well, that sounds very, very positive, and you sound like you responded really well to that. And Caroline, you said earlier that your locality has a particular range of people who may be more susceptible to the negative effects of COVID than others. So I presume you had staff who themselves were coming from communities which are in that situation. How's that been for you?
Yeah, I think, you know, if we rewound a year, people were definitely a lot more concerned about coming back to work. And I think we probably actually had a mixture, because we had staff who were, as we said, redeployed and were actually out at work in food distribution hubs all the time. And I think those staff, right from the very early days, got very used to working in this kind of socially distanced way. So coming back into the library was less traumatic for them. Whereas there's others, yeah, definitely, as Catherine said, people have family members who are shielding, or they, you know, they read in the news that, you know, that they themselves might be at a higher risk. We did do individual, across the whole council, we did individual risk assessments for everybody as well. So everybody had a kind of a rating as to how susceptible they would be should they contract the virus. And then additional steps were put in place for each of those members of staff. And we, obviously, people who needed to shield, we kept those on redeployment, and we kept people back office where we felt that we had to.
Yeah. Well, you sound like you've done wonderfully well, both of you, and I know in common with most library authorities, to keep the show on the road, to look after your staff, to look after your readers, to serve the greater good of the local authority and what it's trying to do to keep its people safe. So I'm really so pleased that you've come along to tell us about what you've been doing, and thank you very much for contributing this. And we look forward to be able to go to real spaces, but also to continue to benefit from the offers you've made in the digital world, because that is clearly also part of it. So I'll allow you both to as is traditionally in Zoom, to mute yourselves and turn your cameras off, and I'll announce our next event. So thank you, Catherine and Caroline. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Well, we've now got a break from the live conversation. We have a recorded piece, my agent insists that I need to have a break. So we're going to be watching a video, and the video is a conversation between two friends of ours, the novelist, the best-selling writer Mike Gale, who is a happy citizen of my home, my city now, Birmingham, in conversation with Nikki B, who's Programme and Participation Lead at Civic Square. And Nikki has been talking to Mike about the importance of well-being in his work as a novelist. Before we screen that video, which we're going to screen in a couple of moments, a little trigger warning I should offer to those of you who are fond of a well-organised shelf. When we watched the video recording, we noticed that a part of Mike Gale's bookshelves were not in absolute perfect order. And if you are of a nervous disposition, you might want to brace yourself for an orthodox way of storing your beloved books. Beyond that, it is a beautiful conversation, and we do hope you'll enjoy this video, which we're about to screen, which is between Mike Gale, novelist, and our friend Nikki B.
Right. Hi, Mike. Great to speak to you about.
Hello there. Thank you very much. So, thank you for having me here. Thank you.
Virtually. One day, hopefully, we'll get to reconnect in your life, like many people are hoping. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about the subject of isolation and loneliness. And in 2018, I was just saying earlier on to you, the UK had its first Minister for Loneliness, and it really took me back thinking, how far have we come as a nation, not in a good way, that we now need a Minister for Loneliness. And it's been said that loneliness is one of the greatest public health challenges of our time. The Minister of Loneliness, which was appointed out of a report in 2017, said there's 9 million of the country's 67 million people either feel lonely some of the time or all of the time. And in 2018, 3/4 of the GPs that have been surveyed said they see on average between 1 to 5 people a day who are suffering from loneliness. And the health impact of these is just, you just can't describe it, from, heart disease to strokes to people suffering from Alzheimer's. And I imagine with the pandemic, this number is probably increased by tenfold by people who are feeling lonely and isolated. Last year, during the start of the pandemic, the University College London did a COVID study, and they found that 1 in 5 adults said that friendships outside of their household had got worse. There's over half of the UK adults, 53%, agree that a reduction in social contact has made their life much harder. 39% of adults have said that they haven't had a meaningful conversation with somebody in over 2 weeks, and that was research done by the British Red Cross. Whilst the pandemic may have made some of us much closer to our neighbours, there's a lot of people who are not feeling connected to anyone in their community, kind of live quite away from family and friends. We now even have a Loneliness Awareness Week in June, and that just raises, as I said at the beginning, raises the concern that as a nation, loneliness is a huge health concern that we need to consider. So Mike, even though we've not met each other for a while in ages, let me just congratulate you on your RNA Outstanding Achievement of the Year award, which you
thank you very much. It's right here if you'd like to see it. There you go.
Fantastic. And I have to say, your book, you and your work have come a long way since you wrote My Legendary Girlfriend many moons ago. And in your 17th book, congratulations on that, All the Lonely People, which is now currently shortlisted for a Nibbies British Book Awards Page Turner Award, fingers crossed. And in this book, you tackle loneliness amongst several other themes, and I won't give away too many spoilers, but I'll just say All the Lonely People is a wonderful, heartwarming, compassionate novel about loneliness, about isolation, about racism, about prejudice, and above all, it's about family and friendship on many levels. It centres around Hubert. I won't give away too many spoilers. It's based on Hubert, a widower who kind of creates an alternative life, a social life at that. So his daughter, who lives in Australia, doesn't really worry about her dad being lonely. As I've mentioned, the book has many themes, with loneliness being one of them. Was there a particular reason you wanted to write about isolation and loneliness?
To be honest, I think you sort of summed it up in your introduction. It was just the fact that loneliness seems to be this huge thing, and there's a running joke within the book about loneliness being this bigger killer than cancer, and it's not, but the impact of loneliness are impacting on it's huge, and it can affect people's health, and it can affect people's mental health. And so I really wanted to look at loneliness because it seemed to me that the more connected we're becoming through the internet and all sorts of apps and all the rest of it, we were still quite divided. Now, when I wrote this, it was obviously pre-pandemic, so I'd finished this book. The book came out this time, probably around this time last year, and when in the lead up, I remember I was talking to my agent and my editor, and we were all saying it couldn't be a better book for this time, because, you know, I think a lot of people were thinking about loneliness in a sort of, you know, might have thought about loneliness in a theoretical sense. But suddenly here we were in this situation where we were actually being told that we had to stay home, and that we couldn't see our friends and we couldn't see our neighbours, and that we, you know, so suddenly isolation became at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. And I know a lot of people who were shielding found that very, very difficult, because you couldn't see loved ones, you were dependent on, you know, telephone conversations and Zoom and things, but it's not the same as seeing somebody. And so I suppose I hadn't even thought about all of these things prior to it, but I mean, it just made the book even more pertinent. And I suppose when I wrote All the Lonely People, I was thinking about loneliness, and I was thinking about how much of a problem it's becoming. And I wanted to look at a life. I wanted to look at, you know, we all sort of see those sort of characters, and they kind of, you can kind of just tell from looking at them that they lead really lonely lives, really isolated lives. And I wanted to look at how perhaps a life becomes, so a character, a person can become lonely. And so with All the Lonely People, I wanted to look at two strands. I wanted to look at how Hubert became lonely. And I wanted to kind of imagine a sort of, I always describe it as being someone being on their own, and then they meet a partner, and then they together, they start a family. And it's almost like a house filling with people. And then gradually, as the children leave home and various things happen, the house empties until, you know, you're back on your own again. And so that's basically the long story of Hubert. But also I wanted to look at what we can do about loneliness. And I had this sort of idea about, and it was it's quite a ridiculous idea really in a lot of ways, that two people decide to end loneliness, and whether, you know, just imagining what would happen if people got behind this idea. And so part of that is the story of Hubert and his loneliness, and meeting his neighbour Ashley, and how they together decide to kind of end loneliness in Bromley. And although it's sort of comical, at the same time there's a sort of serious element to it, because it talks to the power, it speaks to the power of community. And actually sometimes we can convince ourselves that, you know, we're not in a position of power. And one of the wonderful things that we've seen over the last 12 months is that actually we've seen communities come together. We've seen people make a huge difference. And, you know, we can sometimes think that we're powerless, we can't change things. But actually, when we come together, we can solve all sorts of problems.
Totally. You can never underestimate the power of people, particularly
Exactly,
in collective change. Did you base Hubert on anyone in particular, or, you know, how did you come to the idea of kind of centering the story on Hubert?
I was aware that, you know, I couldn't name a modern novel that featured, I couldn't name many novels, modern novels especially, that feature sort of Afro-Caribbean pensioners. And so I was thinking about my parents, I suppose, and their generation, and a number of them, you know, there have been I suppose they're getting to that age where not quite a number of people are passing away. And so I wanted to kind of look at my parents' generation, those that kind of came to England in the 50s and 60s, invited by the UK government to, the British government to basically fill do all the jobs that needed doing, because there weren't enough people to do them. And the reception that they sort of received from different sections of British community, some were welcome, some weren't. And so I wanted to sort of look at that. And I suppose I had people of my parents' generation. My dad is he's a very smart gent. And I use the word gent you know, my dad, you'd look at my dad and you go, that's a gentleman. There's no doubt about that. And I suppose I had him as a little bit of a model. He's not exactly the same at all, but just this idea of someone who's quite smart and quite presentable. And I suppose I was, again, like I say, I was thinking about my parents' generation, and thinking about also the experience of different ways of looking at loneliness through the lens of someone who has travelled from one side of the world to come to another side of the world, to another country, to make a life. And it's a story that kind of Hubert kind of comments, you know, it's a story that is playing out even now, you know, with immigration, and the sort of reception that immigrants receive. And I suppose it's a little way of looking at, you know, how much change has gone on in the time since we had this kind of first wave of immigration. How much has changed? Has anything changed at all? And so that's why I wanted to kind of look at it through the eyes of someone like Hubert.
No, I think you're definitely right about, you know, I can't think of a book that comes to mind that covers that kind of story from that lens. So it's definitely one that, you know, has been missed by the publishers. So in terms of like libraries, we all know libraries are traditionally have kind of played a vital role as places of refuge and community, particularly for those who, you know, who live on their own or don't have many family and friends around them. We can appreciate now, you know, particularly in the pandemic, most libraries have been closed or have had very limited services. It's been said by 2030, the loneliness epidemic will take on disastrous proportions, with 7 million lonely people in the over age 60 group alone. 2 million of them are expected to see their own lifespan shortened by loneliness. What advice can you offer library staff who may know somebody like Hubert?
To be honest, I think that libraries are doing an absolutely amazing job. I mean, even during the pandemic, it was wonderful. You know, I was contacted by a number of libraries who wanted to kind of still reach readers, and it was really important to them. You know, that there were so many people had, you know, they had the book groups. All the book groups went online, so that was great. They were making ways to make sure that people could get access to books, even you know, sometimes it was ebooks, but you know, people were always trying to get books out there, trying to make that connection. And I think libraries are doing a really amazing job of connecting to people. And I suppose ultimately it's all based on, you know, so much of it is based on being online. And if you're not online, things can become quite difficult. I genuinely do think that libraries are doing a really good job, and the things like, you know, book clubs and whether virtual or in person, that, you know, all of these things are helping people to kind of come into spaces and just sort of meet people. So, you know, offhand, I don't think there's any advice I could give. I think that I could probably learn more from libraries, because I genuinely think I can't think of a collection of people more dedicated to kind of connecting with community, and I'm not just even readers, but just connecting to community. So I think I'm the one who should be learning from librarians, not the other way around. So yeah.
I think you may have answered my last question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So we instinctively think of the elderly when we think about loneliness and people being isolated, but now there's increasing numbers of young mums, kind of folks with disabilities, access issues, particularly now during the pandemic, folk who are shielding for health reasons, and, you know, amongst other people who are isolated at the moment. How do you think libraries, and I say loosely, books and reading, can help combat loneliness and isolation?
One of the really interesting things that kind of came out of the pandemic was just how important stories are to people, and so what was interesting was that in the weeks leading up to lockdown, the first lockdown, Waterstones had their best selling period outside of Christmas ever, and it was just this idea of people stockpiling books because they realised that they were going to be alone, and they also realised that they had this wonderful opportunity. And I think books and stories help connect us to people. So even if we're not able to physically be with people, we can be with people through stories, and we can empathise with characters, and we can live all these different lives just through the pages of a book. And so really what libraries are doing, getting books out there, I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, just even the concept of, mobile libraries, how dedicated are library people to, we'll come to you and we'll bring books. I mean, I think that's fantastic. And I think all of these things, any way that we can get books in, whether it's by electronically or by mobile libraries or by people kind of coming to libraries, it's connecting, books are connecting people to people. And I think it's a really lovely way to kind of for people to feel that they're not alone in this. And lots of lovely I've had lots of lovely responses to All the Lonely People, but I think lots of them have been about people writing to me saying that how lonely they felt, and how much comfort they felt in reading this story, because they felt like they've been heard and they've been seen. And I think, I can't think of any greater praise that, for me as an author, that I feel like I've made a difference to somebody. So I think, again, libraries are doing a great job. And I think it's just more of the same, really, getting books out to people, connecting to people. And just the fact that there's such a wonderful array of books. I'm a huge believer in that there's, there aren't, lots of people will say, oh, I don't read. And I just think you just haven't met the right book. And, the wonderful thing about libraries is you're not committing yourself. You don't have to fork out any money. There is a book out there for you. You just got to find it. And librarians are there to help you find that book.
Totally. I think I couldn't have put it better myself. I mean, I'm a great advocate for public libraries, having worked in one for nearly 17 years. Of course, yeah. Grew up with, accessing libraries in Sandwell. And I think you can never, I think more so now than ever, we talk about libraries being lifelines to many people, but, if they're not being resourced, whether it's staff or resources, money for, budgets and what have you, then there's no point us advocating them, because there's only so far the money can go. But it's been lovely chatting to you, and I've really,
thank you very much. Thank you.
All the Lonely People has been on my list of like many people on there to be read pile. Haven't quite got to it yet, but it sounds like a fantastic book. And I think what you've just said about, one of the best compliments you've heard about the book is like, people have been heard. And I think it's that whole thing where books don't make you feel lonely. You might feel isolated, but there's something about, shared experiences, that, having empathy, kind of, it's that whole, those cliches, you can travel, loads of countries without leaving your home. And I think it's that emotional side, which, often when people are on their own, they do feel alone, they do feel isolated. But when you can share someone's lived experience through the power of a book, through the power of word, we can never underestimate it. So Mike,
absolutely.
Really
thank you very much.
Enjoyed chatting to you, and hopefully people who are going to hear this will enjoy it too.
Well, wasn't that lovely? And if you have been affected by Mike Gale's bookshelves on the right-hand side, see if you can seek solace by tidying your own bookshelves. As you see, mine behind me are very well organised. Our grateful thanks to Mike Gale and Nikki B for sharing that wonderful conversation. And now we're going to have a final very quick session, probably about 10 minutes or so, just seeing if we can sum up what we've learned and seeing if there are any particular action points we can talk about. And I can think of nobody better to help me do that than Isabel Hunter, who is Chief Executive of Libraries Connected. Isabel, please join me in the conversation. There you are. Hello, Isabel. Very nice to see you.
Hello.
Hi. So you and I have got about between 5 to 8 minutes really to try and sum up a little bit of what we've seen, but also to talk about what needs to happen next. I know you're in a position where you are taking this overview because of your role. First of all, what have you heard and possibly learned from this afternoon?
So firstly, it's been a brilliant afternoon. There's been so much jam-packed in there, even more jam-packed than your bookshelves. Firstly, I think librarians love a messy bookshelf because it shows that the books are being well used and people are enjoying it. But I think there's been so much to digest, some really great ideas. I think what's really struck me is that you know, the pandemic's obviously been a really dreadful experience, but it's also been a period when people have really turned to reading and books for information, entertainment, solace, and really to connect with others. And I think it's fascinating that throughout today, I think the word connect was used far more than the word books or the word reading or the word library. And that lovely phrase, I think that Natalie came up with, that books are the spark that connect people to people. So I think that's something I really want to take hold of.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I was going to say, your organisation certainly was ahead of the game when it changed its name.
Yeah, that's going
to happen.
I also think I've been struck by the sheer creativity. So again, you know, it's been just a horrific time. Libraries could have just closed their doors and, you know, everyone gone home and done the gardening and walked the dog, but instead they didn't. It was like an unleashing of creativity and determination, trying to find new ways and new partnerships to get stuff out there. So really making the most of digital, making the most of new partnerships, you know, like, I don't know, working through food banks or charities to get books and resources out to people, starting to do stuff outdoors and in weird and wonderful places. And as you know, some of the speakers have talked about that way of having to think through new ways of doing traditional library work within the library in a way that keeps people safe and gets them back. So I think there's just enormous drive and creativity there. And if we think back to where we were in March 2020, I think it's moments like this we need to stop and give ourselves a really collective cheer for, you know, having got so far and sort of normalized these new ways of working.
Yes, that's certainly true. And as to the future and how libraries need to change or continue to change over the next 5 to 10 years, it may be too early to tell. The world's very uncertain. But what are your thoughts as a Libraries Connected leader?
So I think we're all holding our breath to see how, as a population as a whole, we change. So there's been obviously immediate changes to how we live, where we work, where we spend our leisure. So there may be some of these changes are longer term. So we've been really tracking some of the thinking that's coming out of the High Street Task Force and what this means for libraries. Are the smaller neighbourhood libraries really going to come to the fore? Will people be working and travelling less in big city centres? So I think that's a really interesting pattern to watch out for. But at Libraries Connected, we're talking increasingly about the 3-channel library. So how important it is for libraries to operate physically. I think the lack of the limits on the physical library space and physical stock over the last year has really made us all realise how vital that is, especially for connecting communities, tackling loneliness and bringing people together. Obviously digital, how we can continue to develop that and continue to ride that wave of innovation that we've enjoyed this last year. And also the 3rd channel, outside their walls. So again, how do you take libraries, work and books deep into communities, outdoors and in community spaces and into people's homes? So I think what emerged from the pandemic was this real, the reason the library service was resilient and was able to continue even in the strictest of lockdowns in that first lockdown. The reason for that resilience is because they do operate through these 3 channels. So, you know, when the physical had to close down or be limited, then libraries were really able to push activity through the other channel and try new ways of working. So that's something that I think is really, really key for the future. And that allied with, you know, that creativity and determination. I'm hoping that willingness to experiment, to take a risk, that libraries that library staff and the sort of management structures that they sit within, that willingness to take a risk will still be supported, and that sort of unleashing of library staff, because I think that's vital. It's the library staff on the front line know their communities, know what they like, so they are, you know, always the best people to come up with the great new ideas about how to develop services.
Yes, that's been very obvious, hasn't it? And just to pick you up on, or ask you to say a little bit more on the point you just mentioned there, the idea of libraries being so much more than just a physical building. I think all of us have noticed that we had up until now privileged buildings, privileged these great or sometimes small or occasionally prefabricated places where things would happen funded by local authority. And in fact, what we should have been focusing on is not the bricks and mortar per se, but the activities that went within them, the people who came to them and the staff who ran them. So I want to particularly ask you about that notion you said about us moving back to a more localized way of offering our services. Are you thinking that may be something which will happen, that there'll be a gradual flow away from centres to more general distribution within a local authority area?
Potentially. I think that sorry, just 1 minute, I've got some terrible background noise. Wait, could you just turn that off a minute? Because right? Sorry, just 1 sec.
Okay, the manifold challenges of Zoom.
Sorry, the joys of working at home with so the coffee machine being cleaned. I'm sure everyone will appreciate the importance.
It's very important, yes. Anyway, you were saying.
Sorry, could you ask the question again?
Just about whether we will see the flow of investment in libraries moving away from a few centres, but more towards the more disparate investment across the whole of a local authority area, for instance.
Yeah, potentially, but yeah. So I think, you know, time will tell how people's work and live and leisure and travel patterns will settle down. I mean, there are signs that in central London that people are starting to return to offices, for example. Yeah. But I think it may be, you know, there may be a marked change. Maybe more of us will be working at least part of the week at home and living much more locally. So again, I think that's where that 3-channel library comes in, because changing the configuration of buildings is not a quick, you know, and anyone involved with libraries knows that, you know, you can be 5 years or even a decade in planning how buildings might need to change and evolve and getting the resources to do it. But thinking about operating through those 3 channels allows that change to happen in a more flexible way. You know, so if you can't build a whole new building locally or physically install services there, are there ways that you can bring some of that digitally or, you know, outside the walls? And again, is there a new role for the wonderful mobile libraries as such a wonderful institution? So great to hear that being talked about. But at the heart of it, I think again, for me, what the pandemic has brought home is that libraries are absolutely in the people business. And some of the comments that I've read from library users through the pandemic, some of them have honestly made me cry because they've been so moving. And what they've appreciated is, I know, home library users, yes, of course, they've loved the books and the resources arriving at home that have kept them entertained. But what they've really, really appreciated is the contact with the familiar face, that lovely library lady who's come and, you know, stood at the gate and had a chat. So again, it's that connection. And it's that people bit. That's what makes that's what puts the librariness in libraries that makes it so much more than a transactional book service, that really makes it about connecting and inspiring and speaking people.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think you've summed up that wonderfully by saying if it is the people that make the librariness of libraries. And if we've learned anything from the last year and a half, is that we have to completely recalibrate what it is that is worth investing in and exactly what are the bits that people really value. Isabel, thank you so much for summing up what was a very packed afternoon so succinctly, and for your that really fascinating notion of there being 3 tracks of libraries. We'll certainly look out for that in the future and hopefully encourage people who can help make that happen to help make that happen. So as is traditionally in Zoom, I'll invite you to switch your camera off and mic off, but I'll say thank you very much for your support and for the support of Libraries Connected. Bye for now. So, folks, we are coming to the very end. We've got about 2 minutes left. We might add on the extra minutes as a special treat because there is a special treat coming. I'm about to welcome back on screen my colleague Angela Hickin, and now I become the traditional round of thanks to everybody. Please don't tune out because we've got something a little bit creative at the end of my adverts. First of all, to remind you, this has been brought to you by the West Midlands Readers Network, and particularly to thank my colleague Angela Hickin, who is our project manager, who's done so much to bring this event together and chaired events beautifully and made sure we all know what's going on. I'd also like to thank Libraries Connected, both regionally and nationally, who have co-produced and co-promoted this event with us. And as we've heard, their work in encouraging investment in libraries in the future is going to be really, really important over the next few years. Thanks as ever to Arts Council England, who are funders of the West Midlands Readers Network. We've been so grateful for the support they've given us and allowed us to do so many interesting things. I'm going to hand over to Angela in a moment. She'll say a little bit about West Midlands Readers Network and then do a final little moment before we go. But before I hand over to her, thanks, of course, to my colleagues at West Midlands Readers Network. I've appeared by kind permission of Writing West Midlands, and I'd like to thank my colleagues Hefwyn and Olivia and Daisy for their work in making this afternoon's event so seamless. Thank you to all our speakers. Those who've come along pre-recorded, we've really appreciated your time and commitment. We've appreciated what you've had to say, but most importantly, we've appreciated all the work you have done and are continuing to do for public libraries and for independent bookshops in this region and beyond in the whole of the UK. So I've done all my formal notices. I'm going to introduce Angela Hickey. You've already met her, but Angela is going to do a final reading. A week or so ago, we stumbled across a beautiful poem about the experience of reading in a very particular location, and we both of us immediately felt this has got some resonance. We should share this. The poem has been written by the New England poet Joan Michelson, who's resident in the UK for many years, and she's given us kind permission to share it with you, and I do hope you enjoy it. So as a final moment, we're going to put the poem on screen. I'm going to welcome Angela, and I'm going to say goodbye and thank you very much for your kind attention. Angela, over to you.
The Reader. Leon read to Julia, who could no longer see. He chose Dostoevsky, The Brothers K. After supper, one chapter. Then music of Julia's choice, often a symphony by Mahler. After Julia's daughter had to move her elsewhere, Leon spent the evenings reading chapters to himself in the parlour armchair. In time, his own eyesight failed. The home found Frank to be his reader. Frank came Tuesdays, always eager. Leon waited on the parlour couch. Sitting close to Frank, he listened, motionless, until, overcome by what he heard, he burst out loud, "Who wrote that?" He shook his head in disbelief, repeating, "Genius." After Leon died, Frank composed an ode in homage and sent it to Julia's daughter.